Welcome to the Healing Grove podcast. I'm Dr. Kristin, an integrative holistic family physician, author of Life After Lyme, and host in this virtual space of learning, healing, and growing. I believe humans are like trees, and our physical limb is only one of many. Health on all limbs of the tree, emotional, conceptual, social, spiritual, is absolutely required for the whole tree that is you to be vibrantly well. I created the Healing Grove podcast as a place to showcase some of the world's best integrative and holistic medicine, to expose you to transformative tools and mindset shifts for all limbs of your tree. I hope you enjoy our conversation in the Healing Grove today as much as I enjoyed having it. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Healing Grove podcast. I'm delighted today to introduce you to my good friend, Dr. Bill Rawls. Dr. Rawls has been a licensed medical doctor for over 30 years. And when his life was disrupted by chronic Lyme disease, he turned to alternative approaches, ultimately restoring his health with intensive herbal therapy, supportive nutrients, and structured lifestyle modifications. And we're going to get into some of the details about all of that in this talk. In the years since his recovery, he's helped thousands of patients overcome chronic Lyme disease and related chronic illnesses. He's the best-selling author of Unlocking Lyme, which is actually how I was initially introduced to your work, and more recently, The Cellular Wellness Solution, which is also an awesome read. In fact, after reading that book, I invited you to come speak to my community a couple years back. You probably remember that, and you were gracious enough to share your time and wisdom with us then, and even I think have done a demonstration with us of some of the coaching practices that you guys employ in your company, Vital Plan, with one of my assistants, Jerry, who was super grateful for that. So thank you for that. And thank you for agreeing to come back. It's always great to see you and have you. And
always a pleasure.
Awesome. So before we get started, I would love it if you'd give us a little overview of kind of what brought you to this path as being a medical doctor who uses herbs for healing.
Yeah, it was all by accident, of course, not planned, just one of those things. But I'll have to say, I went to medical school and was almost a bit appalled by the use, how aggressively pharmaceuticals were used to basically keep people alive, but not necessarily make them well. And that pushed me to do OBGYN, which is less pharmaceutical oriented, more bringing life into the world, healthier patients. But ironically, that forced me into a very unhealthy lifestyle because 30 years ago, I was in a 3-person group, which meant I was on call for labor and delivery and the emergency room every third day. So despite working in the office, I would have to take call for 24 hours, which meant that a lot of times I was running on 2 or 3 hours of sleep when I was on call. And the weekends, it was from Friday morning till Monday morning and intermittent sleep that whole time, every second or third weekend. In my 30s, I could just push through. It's like, yeah, I can do this. And I could keep my edge, I could keep doing it. But as I worked through my 40s, I was starting to lose the ability to recover when I wasn't on call and really lost the ability to sleep and was by age 47 was in real trouble. Ended up having to stop doing obstetrics. But it wasn't just sleep deprivation. It's my whole body started falling apart. My joints, my brain. I started having heart issues. I was having every symptom imaginable. Uninterestingly, all the symptoms that matched both fibromyalgia and chronic Lyme, and then some. So I was worked up for MS. You're just not sick enough, or you don't have MS, even though you got some of the symptoms. And I went through cardiac workup, full cardiac cath, all of that. Well, you got a lot of skip beats, a lot going on, but you don't have any blocked vessels. We can't really do anything for you. And it went on like this. And finally, I kept coming back to the fact that had just plenty of tick bites when I was a child. Could it be Lyme disease? Initially, the test was negative. Later, another tick bite with a bullseye rash clued me in. Well, this probably was Lyme all along. I did, multiple courses of antibiotics. They made me sicker. instead of getting well with the things that were coming from the conventional community, medical community, I was getting worse. And it was about that time, 2005, that Stephen Booner wrote his book on healing Lyme, and I read it, and it made sense, and I had herbs in the back of my mind. I knew a lot of patients who used them. I really had not that much, didn't have high expectations, but thought, yeah, I don't have any other choice. Because by then I'd stopped doing OB, I'd opened another practice in primary care just to keep, money flowing so we could, pay the mortgage, kids off at college, that sort of thing. And there was a lot of stress, but I couldn't leave town and go pursue therapy from Lyme doctors. I couldn't do IV antibiotics. I couldn't do much of anything. So it was like, well, I'm going to try this thing because it's the one thing that I can do. And it worked. And over a 5 year period, I got my health back completely. But over the past 15 years, I've been able to maintain above average health using herbal therapy, using, diet and lifestyle modifications, and spent the past all of that time really studying, well, what's going on, what happened, what were the herbs doing to my physiology that restored my health, because I had discounted herbs as just kind of weak versions of drugs, and here they were doing something remarkable. But through it all, I didn't really have any drug-like effects. I didn't feel like I was taking a drug. So it's like, this is something very, very different and something that we all should be paying attention to. And that's what I've been doing. And it's been an interesting journey.
Wow. So what I'm hearing is, despite the fact that you hadn't learned about any of this in medical school, I mean, I didn't learn any of this in medical school. We don't learn herbs in medical school, right? Not in
Oh,
this
no.
industry. Um, Despite not having learned that, you sort of stumbled upon it. It was the low-hanging fruit. It was the thing that was accessible to you because you couldn't leave
Right.
practice to go get IV infusions. You couldn't go to Germany. You couldn't do all the things that people do when they have the resources and time to do it. You just had to use what was available. And it turned out that what was available was kind of more than adequate to get not only your health back, but feel even better than you should feel at the
Yeah,
age you're at.
truly.
So it sounds like it challenged both your predispositions and assumptions about what herbs could and couldn't do. But I think it also will probably challenge a lot of other people who think that how could you possibly take some plants and herbs and eat those and have the same effect as antibiotics might have? Because I think a lot of people are so, primed to think of, well, if you have an infection, you take an antibiotic. Talk to us about that preconceived notion that turns out to be completely false.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think this is really important. All antibiotics were originally derived from a natural source, either a bacteria, a fungus, or a plant. Every single one of them. But when you look at that, so basically we were borrowing from that organism's defense system because plants have to defend themselves against viruses and bacteria and all of that. Funguses, their arch enemy is bacteria, and even bacteria, they have to defend themselves against bacteria and funguses and other things too. So we all have to have a defense system. But what we do with an antibiotic is we pluck one chemical from that entire defense system. So unlike us, animals have a cellular defense system. Our immune system has white blood cells, etc. Plants, fungi, and bacteria using a chemical defense system, but it is complementary. So we're pulling one chemical. Why do we do that? Because we're not smart enough to duplicate that entire organism's defense system. We're just not that good. And this idea that smart scientists are sitting in a lab somewhere and dreaming up a chemical to kill bacteria, nah, we're not that good. Everything comes from an organism. For example, everybody has heard, because of all the publicity, of ivermectin, right? It came up with COVID. It's something we use for parasites. So where did it come from? A bacteria, a soil bacteria from a golf course in Japan. Very interesting. So they pulled a chemical But once you have that chemical, that's a natural chemical. You can't get a patent on it. And if you can't get a patent, you can't pay for the millions, now billions of dollars of research to bring that drug to market. So you need something you can patent. So you twist that chemical a little bit to potentiate it, but also make it unique. So that's how you make an antibiotic. So it's a single chemical that is a random killer. And certain things like ivermectin, they tried it on bacteria and viruses and all kinds of stuff, and they found it, well, it works best for parasites. We'll use it for that. So it's more of a trial and error thing. So that's where all of our antibiotics came from. So they're very select. They're really good for killing fast growing bacteria. So if you've got a pneumococcal pneumonia in your lungs, those bacteria are invading the cells of your lungs and they are turning over with a growth rate of doubling every 20 minutes. So somebody can get really sick really fast. Antibiotics, that's the right solution. But when you look at the tick-borne microbes, Borrelia, Bartonella, Babesia, they're very slow growing. It's one of their defense mechanisms. Borrelia, the Lyme bacteria, in its active phase, doubles every 12 to 24 hours. That's quite a bit less than a pneumococcal bacteria, so antibiotics aren't going to be as effective. So when you take a plant, you get that plant's whole defense system, and it has an intelligence to be selective for pathogens, not normal flora. So it doesn't kill the normal flora in your gut. It has effect on not only bacteria, but viruses, protozoa, yeast. So you get so you're basically borrowing the plant's defense system. It's the intelligence of that whole defense system. So yeah, absolutely. So every herb has antimicrobial properties, and it's really fascinating.
So interesting. And it's not just that they have antimicrobial properties too. Like there's a lot baked into a given plant. They support your liver as well. They support your
Hmm.
detoxification pathways. I mean, there's so many things you're covering with a single herb, correct?
That's right. And that's where you're getting into the remarkable properties of herbs and what herbs do that are different from drugs. So, drugs are targeted to block abnormal pathways in the body in some way by affecting enzymes, by affecting receptors to block some process of illness or block a manifestation of illness like symptoms. Doesn't really do anything to the causes, it just blocks the way we feel it. So what we're doing with a plant, with an herb, is it's not just protection against microbes, it's protection against free radicals and toxic substances and radiation. So what the plant is doing is it's built a system to protect its cells. So when we take a plant, it's protecting our cells. And we're made of cells. Everything that happens in our body is cellular. So when you're sick, it's because your cells are sick. When you take an herb, it's countering all of the things that are making your cells sick, including microbes. And therefore, herbs do these wonderful things by protecting our cells. They actually promote healing.
So cool. So what I'm hearing is they're kind of the antidote to the stressors and toxicities of modern life,
Mm,
and maybe everybody should be taking them.
hmm.
And is there anybody who shouldn't take herbs? Are there any herbs that could, be dangerous if you had certain conditions or if you had a
Yeah.
certain contraindication?
Yeah, I think it's important when I talk about herbs, it's easy to generalize. And here we're talking about everything from plants that we consume as foods and culinary herbs, all the way to the opposite end of the spectrum, where there are herbs that do have drug-like effects. And many of our drugs, half of our drugs, come from plants. But when you get into things that are drug-like, you're talking about a higher potential for it to be a poison and to cause side effects. So a lot of people like me that are practicing herbalism today are kind of staying away from that end of the spectrum of plants that have chemicals that might cause a drug-like effect or, something that you could feel, and staying with herbs that have more adaptogenic and antimicrobial and cell protective properties, because those are the things that you can't get in trouble with, and those are the things that will help us the most in the long run.
So things like digitalis, for example, or
That's a
monk's
good one.
blood, so things that, I sometimes grow in my garden and,
Yeah,
when someone asks what it is, I usually say, don't take that, don't eat that, that'll stop your heart. Or
that's right. Yeah.
don't eat
So
that,
there are some
you'll
scary
gain,
ones.
yeah. So those things don't end up typically in herbal formulations, correct?
Correct. Yeah. We want the things that are actually just going to promote healing in the body. And digitalis, it can be a very valuable drug for someone with heart failure, but at the same time, when I'm looking at that end, if you gave me a choice between a foxglove extract that I'm getting those chemicals or using a prescribed drug, I'm going to use the prescribed drug because there I know I'm getting a very standardized dose. Whereas with an herb, when you're talking about containing chemicals with drug-like properties, you really can't control that dose of those chemicals as well as you can a drug. So basically, I stay away from those kinds of plants or herbs and just use the ones that don't have those drug-like properties that people don't really feel when they're taking them.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. So tell me, if you had to live for a year by yourself on an island with only 5 herbs, which would be
Yeah.
the ones you would take with you?
Mm. I've had that question. Is like, what's the one herb you would take? And top of my list would be an herb called Chinese skullcap. That's one of our antimicrobial herbs. It has some really nice antimicrobial properties, anti-COVID or anti-SARS virus properties. So it's antiviral, antibacterial, immune modulating, just exceptionally well tolerated. So yeah, Chinese skullcaps, that would be top of my list. Another antimicrobial herb, Japanese knotweed, which contains resveratrol, which is just wonderful for protecting the vascular system. That's a good one. Probably in several adaptogens. One of our medicinal mushrooms, reishi mushroom, that has been studied in Japan and found to have some of the most potent anti-cancer properties known. Rhodiola is a really nice herb. Probably rounded up with maybe turmeric would be good. But there's so many really great ones.
Yeah, yeah. Those are some good ones. And Japanese knotweed, I remember from Stephen Buhner's either book or maybe a lecture I attended when he was still around. What a great mind and what a capacity to kind of just be a plant whisperer. It was so impressive to hear him speak about these different plants. But he talked about Japanese knotweed as being kind of, abundant in places that had high prevalence of Lyme disease, almost
Yeah.
as if the earth was providing kind of what was needed for the location that people were living in. It's pretty,
It is funny how, herbs get around, plants get around, and how they tend to show up where we need them. But something that I've become aware of in maybe the past 5 years or so is how many things are around us all the time that we're not paying attention to. And there's a walk in the woods near my home that I do just about every day. And they have apps now that you can identify plants. So that's been really wonderful for my education. So I know all the plants there. And so many of them would be defined as medicinals. If I was stuck without having to access to commercial preparations, I've got a whole forest there. And the downside of that is there's, a lot of them are seasonal and you have to process them in their shells. And commercial preparations open up our ability to use them better. But another herb that I love is gotu kola, which is native to India. And I read an account from an herbalist that lives up in North Carolina mountains that it grows along the coast of North Carolina and South Carolina. So everywhere I went, I'd been looking for this particular herb. And I was walking this summer and I walked across a footpath and it was like, wow, that looks like Gotu-Kola, like right here. This is awesome. Got out my little phone and confirmed that it was, and it was so yeah, they're all around you. It's really wonderful.
Yeah, are you using Seek? I use Seek as my app.
I forget which one it is. It's there are several out there, but it's
Yeah.
amazing. That's where technology can really open up our world a bit because before it was like a green wall. I take out the books, you try to learn as many as you can, but when you can have that just right in your hand and you can identify everything around you wherever you are with some sophistication, yeah, it's just been really cool. I've enjoyed
Yeah.
that quite a lot.
Yeah, it's great to have that instant confirmation or just education of what you're looking at. I
Yeah.
agree. Cool. So you mentioned earlier, or maybe I was reading this on your website a little bit ago about the sort of range in which people who experience complex chronic illness, some people being severely debilitated and others marginally miserable, I think was the term I saw you use. It sounds like you were pretty debilitated. Is there anything that people who are less ill should be thinking about in terms of herbs? Are they usually dosed in the same way? Like how do you help people understand kind of where they plug into this regimen and this sort of philosophy if they're
Sure.
going
Yeah.
to do that?
I think there are starting points. I started with just basically gulping down the entire Booner protocol as hard as I could. And fortunately, didn't have a lot of GI distress, but so many people have GI issues they've got to get over, or so many of us also, I was affected by just that fight or flight exaggeration, the low vagal tone, excessive sympathetic tone, that we're in that fight or flight response. We're not sleeping. Certain herbs can help with that. And so, really defining a pathway, I think, is important for where they need to start. But the good thing about herbs is the dosage, the amount of the standardized dose is pretty forgiving. I mean, you can start slow and gradually build up, but the toxic dose of most herbs is is huge. I mean, we had one extract that they had done toxicology studies with animals and extrapolated to humans and found out that to really, really threaten someone if in a lethal way, you'd have to take like 3,000 capsules a day for several days or something like that. So it was crazy. But the mistake I think a lot of people make is just not getting enough of the herb, of the phytochemistry of the herb in them. So, starting slow, sometimes starting with a tincture or just single capsules of standardized extracts, which is the highest concentration, building up slowly. We typically dose people up over a couple of weeks to get them to the full dose. But whether, someone moderately miserable or somebody who's really sick, it's more time dependent of how long it's going to take them to get to see some response. Like if someone isn't that severely affected, they might see response within a week or two. Whereas someone else that is more affected, like it took several months before I really, really started showing a big response. And in those first couple of months, you almost just have to have faith. I pushed through and it's like, am I seeing anything those first several weeks? Maybe a little bit. I'll keep going. We'll see what this does. And I just kept going with it. And it's like, by the time was reaching the second and third month, it's like, yeah, there's something going on here. We need to keep going with this.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're not just killing bugs, right? You're not just eradicating sort of the bad actors there over time. You're rebuilding your your whole terrain. You're rebuilding your body's ability to detoxify, and you're rebuilding proteins and cells that were damaged. And that whole remodeling takes
Yeah,
time, rather.
I think that's really important. Where I am now, really understanding chronic Lyme disease, how I understand it is very different than maybe where I was 15 or 20 years ago, in that I was like, yes, I probably had these microbes in my body since I was a child. I'm not sure where they were hiding, but I need to kill them to get well, and I need to eradicate them from my body. Now I realize that they have really sophisticated mechanisms of becoming an ill-fitting part of us. So when you look at the Lyme microbes, Borrelia, Bartonella, Babesia, Rickettsia, and then beyond, chlamydias, mycoplasmas, we're exposed to scores and scores of different things. And all of these things, as I mentioned in the beginning, they're not like a pneumococcal bacteria that's invading and growing fast. That's not their strategy. Their strategy is persistence. What they want to do is have a presence in the body as long as they can, because that gives them unlimited opportunities to spread to new hosts, and that's what they want. So they're not trying to make us deathly sick. They're just trying to get in our body. And how they do that is they enter the body in some way that gets them to the bloodstream, and then they disseminate throughout the body, our brain, our heart, our joints, everywhere. And the first thing they do is invade cells, because cells isolate them from the immune system. So this has been documented with every single microbe. And after they enter a cell, especially if we are healthy at that particular time, they do something remarkable. They slow down their growth or can even go dormant. This has been documented with every one of the Lyme microbes and everything that I've been studying. So this intracellular dormancy or slow growth state, our cells keep right on working like they weren't there. And then it's later in life that, or later in time, that we are confronted with something that causes us stress. For me, it was lack of sleep, eating a poor diet, just being stressed all the time. For other people, it could be something like being in an automobile accident, being, in this bad convalescence in the hospital. There are a lot of ways that the body can be stressed. And when the body is stressed, that allows these cells to reactivate, to basically break that cell down as food and then emerge and start invading other cells. So that's what's going on with chronic Lyme. And it's not just Borrelia, it's everything we've been exposed to, mycoplasmas, Epstein's bars, all of these things that are reactivated. So they're starting to break down our tissues, and our body is becoming a food source to grow microbes. And that's the point that people are sick, but they're not sick in one place. They're sick all over because these microbes are reactivating all over. So at that point, you have active microbes, but you also have this reservoir that's still in your body of these things that are still dormant inside your cells that haven't reactivated. So if you use antibiotics or other therapies, you're going to kill the active, but you're not going to get at the reservoir. So that constant pressure with the herbs allow you to kill the active microbes, but keep pressure. And at the same time, start restoring cellular health. So we're restoring that terrain. We're rebuilding the body back. And as you do that, you decrease the residual microbes' opportunities to to basically break down your body as a food source. So where I am now, I've been healthy for, almost 2 decades, at least 15 years. And I can't tell you whether I've eradicated these microbes, at least the intracellular dormant ones. There are probably some that are hanging around. I think I've worn them down just by attrition from years of taking herbs, but I'm not stopping the herbs because, they're still there, and I'm aging. And As you age, your cells become less functional and you become more vulnerable. So, especially as we age, I think the herbs become more and more important for staying healthy.
Beautiful. Well, I'm glad you got to that because I think that's an open question for a lot of people, and including me. Like, can you fully eradicate these things, or is there a point at which you just have to learn to live with them? And I don't know that I have an answer yet either, although I think as of now, I'm in the same boat as you. I believe there's a few guys hanging around there, and it's
Yeah.
important to continue to keep pressure on them with excellent lifestyle choices, including possibly herbs. I wonder if we could go backwards to the place in which you were talking about how you kind of initially just sort of chugged down as many as you could and luckily didn't have any GI symptoms. But I think I would love to hear you talk about what some people experience and maybe how to mitigate that, maybe why they might experience GI issues or other side effects from herbs, and what are some ways to kind of make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah. In the past, what we've done with the program, with our program, is just gradually, incrementally increasing the dose of the primary antimicrobial and immune modulating herbs. I'm looking at the whole thing a little bit differently now, just talking to people, gathering information that a number of people have had success with starting on herbs that are better at um, that are, adaptogens like ashwagandha and others that have the effect of neutralizing some of those stress hormones. So we're bringing down that overactive sympathetic. And I'm realizing that early on, that's a big driving force for a lot of people. So if you can imagine, I mean, all those distressed cells in your body are sending distress signals to your brain, and your brain is just overloaded with your body being in distress. And that activates the fight or flight response, which actually works against us because it keeps us hyper alert. It keeps us from sleeping. You have to have sleep to recover. It disrupts our hormones, and that contributes to mast cell activation syndrome and immune dysregulation and everything else. So if we can calm that right from the get-go, that's really important. Another thing that overactive fight or flight response does, I've come to realize that that's a big part of the gut dysfunction because it slows intestinal motility. So everything gets backed up. So to me, that's kind of the first order of business is calming that sympathetic overactivity. Herbs can be good for that. Brain retraining, meditation, yoga, qigong, all of these things that we just learn how to basically go against the flow and help to calm our brain, to basically teach our brain to say, no, to get out of this emergency, we need to be calm. We need to have that response normalized. So I think that's first order of business. And then after that, gradually bringing in stronger and stronger antimicrobial herbs, addressing gut dysfunction for a lot of people, which is really important. Getting people on just a basic whole foods, decent diet, and that they can tolerate, and gradually progressing it to something that they can live with for the rest of their lives and stay healthy. Those things are important. And then as they're progressing, then really get them to the stronger antimicrobial herbs. But that whole process can, take 6 months to really get there. Even someone who's only moderately affected, I think going through those steps is really valuable because it teaches you life skills that you will have to get out of this situation and never get back into it again.
Yeah, yeah. I always like to tell my people, Lyme never requires you to become a worse version of yourself, right? It
Right.
doesn't require you to start smoking crack or, partying all night or lying to your neighbors. Like it really requires that you up level kind of in every realm of your being,
Yeah.
which is a
Yeah, I
gift.
think that's important. It's that's something that I noticed and have witnessed with so many people is people who get through this are better than they were before. They're more productive, they're more grounded, they're more able to fulfill their purpose in life. And I think that's really remarkable. So it's almost like a training course in making yourself the best you can be.
That's really, really well said. So if somebody were to want to work with some herbs, I mean, one of the things I love about Vital Plan, the company you started, is that you have taken the Buhner protocol essentially and added to it, but simplified it. When I was sick with Lyme, I also dabbled or, read some of Buhner's things and frankly was overwhelmed by the protocol, which at that point wasn't really a protocol. It was just like, here are all the herbs for each of the co-infections. Here are the doses. It was just like there was too much to know with my brain, which wasn't even working at the time. I
Right.
love how simple you've made it. If somebody wanted to work with some of the herbs and the protocols you guys have put together, what would be like the next step for someone?
Well, we have the basic protocol that we've been using for years that is an assortment of the antimicrobial and immune modulating herbs balanced with the vitamins and nutrients that you need for your cells, glutathione, NAC, and basically in a package that just makes it easier for you to use. Again, we're starting to rethink that to start with more. Herbs that balance that hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis that's the key part of the fight or flight response and gradually work into that full dose. But either way, it's a matter of trying to make it simple. And I think that's where I departed a little bit from Stephen Booner. And don't get me wrong, I have an enormous amount of respect for him. Back there are all his books on that bookshelf behind me. But he wrote like 5 books. He was like in a frenzy to get as much information. And he was looking at each co-infection that we knew of and then corresponding herbs that were good for that particular co-infection. And there was a lot of overlap, but when I started realizing, well, most people have many of these things, they could be taking 50 to 100 herbs. And I realized, you know, what I've come to appreciate is that all herbs have broad spectrum antimicrobial properties. Some are better than others. It really depends on the plant's environment. And if you're taking a spectrum of only like half a dozen to a dozen herbs, you're covering most all of the bases that you could have because, quite frankly, the ones that we knew about when Stephen Booner was writing those books, that's only a small portion of what's actually possible. So, again, I think he was treating all of them as these high grade pathogens, and they're not. They're opportunist. It's more about restoring the abilities of body of the ability of the body to contain them than it is trying to kill each one of them. And so, you don't have to get quite as down in the weeds and overwhelmed. You can start with a very basic protocol, and most people do fine with that. We've had experience with literally thousands and thousands of people and watched people with a wide spectrum of microbes do exceptionally well.
Yeah, beautiful. And for people who want to get a little more granular, you still have the quiz, right? The online quiz people can take,
Sure.
and that helps sort them towards different products maybe to start with. But yeah, you've created a really supportive and helpful method for people who want to use Vital Plan as their next step. So thank you for that.
Yeah, it's kind of what you do, that. It's you go through something like this and it's really important for you to share that with other people in any way that you can.
Yeah. Yeah. So I just want to, so as I'm thinking about your path, it's so similar to mine. We were both kind of in the Western medicine model and overworking when we got hit by Lyme and, weren't on the marginally miserable. We're pretty much on the severely debilitated end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you ever imagined that your journey before it happened would take you to being where you are now and doing the work you are now with the population you're working with now.
Never. Not in my wildest dreams, but I couldn't be happier. I mean, I look at where I would have been, and I would have probably been burned out doing OBGYN at the end of my career. We're just, looking for the day to retire so I could not have to take call anymore, etc. And I'm sitting here and going, yeah, I don't see any time soon that I'll be retiring because I really, really like what I'm doing and the energy that surrounds me. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, it is really good. Well, is there anything that we haven't touched on that you would feel is important to share with this community of people who are looking for non-traditional, but nonetheless very powerful and sustainable natural solutions for health?
Yeah, the one comment I would make is to start there first. It's whether you look at our conventional system or even beyond that, even in functional and integrative medicine, a lot of the focus is on treating dysfunction. And treating dysfunction doesn't get to the root causes. The root causes are basically the things that make our cells sick, and that is what you eat and the environment you live in, and whether you're getting the amount of sleep you need, and whether you're moving enough, and whether you're getting extra protection from microbes. That's it. That's the formula. And I think that gets missed. Obviously, our conventional system is in real trouble right now as far as the way it serves, especially chronically ill patients. Um, and so much of it you can do yourself. And if you take that responsibility to become proactive in your own health, you have a much higher chance of reaching a level of wellness that you never thought you might achieve than you can imagine. It's all in your pocket, and it's not as hard to do. Takes commitment, takes time. Restoring it, healing takes time, and that's what we're talking about is optimizing the healing potential in our body. There isn't a doctor or a doctor's office out there that can directly cause you to heal. That has to come from inside of you. And so, what's important for us as healthcare providers is to orient the patient in the right way and to support them in their healing journey. And the more that we do that, the more that we make the patient the hero instead of a passive bystander in that recovery, the more that we have, the better chances are that that person is going to reach a level that they really want and end up in that place of being this outstanding person that's come through this ordeal that comes out on the other side that is better than when they started.
That's so beautiful. Let's end there. It was perfect. Thank you again.
My pleasure, always.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Healing Grove podcast. If you liked it, please be sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to deepen your experience further, consider grabbing a copy of the Healing Grove Playbook. With journal prompts for this podcast and 41 others, it's the perfect place to record your learnings, keep track of the tools you explore, and reflect on your own experience. Finally, it's important to mention that even though I am a doctor, nothing you hear on this podcast, whether from myself or my guests, constitutes medical advice. Any intervention you try should always be discussed with and supervised by a trusted member of your own healing team. Thanks for listening, and see you next time in the Healing Grove.